What's up everyone, it's your boy Steve and welcome to my channel. Today, I'm starting something that I've honestly been wanting to do for a long time. I'm building my own manga-inspired series, and it's not just some random story either. I'm talking mythology, powers, ancient legends, gods, monsters, all that good stuff, but rebuilt through my own universe and my own creative lens. I've always loved mythology. Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, African mythology, which that's kind of the same thing, Mesoamerican mythology, all of it. It's just something so dope about the way humans create these huge fantastical stories to explain the world around them. Thunderstorms, death, the sun, the moon, war, love, chaos, everything has a story behind it. And those stories were so powerful that thousands of years later, we're still talking about them. But for my series, I didn't just want to retell those myths the exact same way. I wanted to take inspiration from them and rebuild it inside my own world. So this video is actually the first step in documenting that process. The art, the characters, the world building, power system, the mistakes I make, the redesigns, all of it. And today, we're starting with the foundation. What kind of mythology am I actually building? The story I'm working on right now is called Primordials, the Falcon, and the Serpent. It's a part of a larger universe I've been working on called, well, Primordials. So for the 10 of you watching this who already know that name, you may remember my first attempt at Primordials from Webtoon's Arcapis, but that version is no longer available, so we'll get into that later. But the premise, or one of the premises behind Primordials, is what if the myths, gods, legends, and supernatural beings that people talked about throughout history weren't just some random fantasy? What if those stories came from real people who were connected to ancient cosmic forces? In this universe, the legends we know of today are basically echoes of real-life events. Over time, people may have exaggerated them, misunderstood them, worshipped them, feared them, passed them down until it becomes the myths that we're familiar with today. So instead of treating mythology like something separate from the world, I'm using it as a way to explore power, responsibility, destiny, and what happens when a regular human being inherits something much bigger than themselves. That is the heart of Primordials. It's not just, what if the gods were real? It's more like, what if the stories that we call mythology were just broken memories of something a lot more real? So as you may or may not know, I've been working on the idea of Primordials since COVID times, really. It's been about 6 years in the making, and I've been drawing comics and making stories for as long as I can remember. But I've always had one big problem. I just loved action scenes. I love fight scenes, powers, transformations, dramatic poses, characters getting launched through walls, all of that. Thanks Dragon Ball Z for all that. But actual storytelling, characters talking, pacing, structure, setup and payoffs, yeah, 12-year-old me is not worried about that. It's been a struggle. For years, I've always been interested in making something look cool rather than making sure a story actually worked. While I was researching on how to get better at this, I kept hearing the same advice over and over again.
Especially if you're a beginner, you should start with a very short story for starters.
If you want to make a manga for the first time, don't start big.
If you're new to manga creation, I highly recommend starting with a one-shot manga.
Start small, start small, start small. And I'm gonna be real, I hated that advice because I didn't want to start small. I had this huge epic series in my head with gods and cosmic beings, elemental powers and gangs and ancient history and world-ending battles, and I wanted to tell this big, huge story immediately. So I started writing, I started drawing, and I started uploading, and I realized something pretty painful.
And I've got to say, in all honesty, it's the biggest piece of dog shit that
It was kind of trash. Well, not trash because I didn't care. I actually cared a lot, but the execution was not where it needed to be. My prologue, and another piece of advice is please keep your prologue short. My prologue took almost a whole year to finish. There was barely any dialogue, so people were confused about what was happening. And when there's no dialogue, readers just fly through the episode and leave. Like, okay, that looked cool, but what did I just read? Every now and then I'll get compliments on the anatomy, which I appreciated, but that was about it. At one point, my webtoon had over 1,000 views, but barely any comments and 40 subscribers. So clearly something wasn't connecting. And the more time went on, the more obvious it became. 3 years had passed and I was barely getting into chapter 1. By then I had new ideas, new character designs, new plot points, and worst of all, I didn't even have a strong middle of the story. Hell, I didn't even have an end of the story. The actual journey wasn't even contemplated fully. That's when I realized something had to change if I wanted to be the kind of comic writer and artist I actually wanted to be. So I took a step back. I decided to listen to the advice from the professionals that I kept ignoring and try to figure out how to start small. But I didn't want to completely abandon Primordials. That's my baby. I love the universe. I still love the elemental power system. I love the idea that mythology came from real people connected to ancient cosmic forces. So the question really became, how do I practice storytelling, finishing an actual project, and still build towards that larger primordial universe? Then I had an idea. Why don't I take a concept of Primordials that I kind of brushed aside or brushed past really, of myths and legends actually happening in the real world, just diluted through the generations. Why not take some of those myths and legends and focus on making stories out of those? That way I could practice storytelling with the foundation that already exists while putting my own spin on it. It gives me structure, it gives me a clear beginning, middle, and end, and it lets me keep building the larger universe without jumping straight into the biggest story I want to tell first. That's where the Falcon and the Serpent came from. For this one-off, I wanted to start with Egyptian mythology. Not only is it one of my favorites, but it just has such a strong visual identity. The symbols, the gods, the architecture, the desert, the Nile, the sun, the moon, like it has such a powerful atmosphere to it. So I decided to focus on one of the well-known mythological conflicts, Horus versus Set. But I didn't just want to copy the traditional version. I didn't want to just take the gods and everyone else and say, okay, here's the same myth, but now with anime fights. Even though, anime fights are definitely a part of the appeal, I wanted to ask a bigger question. What would these key figures look like if they existed within my primordial universe? What if their powers came from something deeper, a deeper system that connects every myth in the world? What if the version we know today is just a legend that survived after thousands of years of retelling? That's the creative space that I'm trying to work in. So it isn't meant to be a historical reenactment. It's not meant to replace the original myths. It's my own universe using the mythology as an inspiration. So the goal is to take something ancient but familiar and rebuild it into something that feels fresh, emotional, and connected to a much bigger world. One of the fun parts of this project is figuring out how the mythological figures translate into my own power system. In a primordial universe, powers are tied to larger elemental and cosmic forces. So when I look at characters like Horus, Anubis, Set, Thoth, I'm not just asking what do they do in the myths, I'm asking what element will best fit them, what kind of abilities will make sense, what are their limits, what do their powers say about who they are, because I don't want the powers to just be random. If someone has an ability, I want it to connect to their personality, their role in the story, their emotional conflict. That's something I'm really trying to improve on. The action should look cool, of course. I mean, come on, it's manga we're talking about, but fights should not just be only a spectacle. They should come from character choices, relationships, betrayal, fear, responsibility, pressure. That's what makes a fight actually matter. It's not just a hard punch and then another hard punch. It's the weight behind the punch. Now at the center of the Falcon and the Serpent is one major theme: responsibility. And I don't mean responsibility in the simple superhero way like with great powers come great responsibility. I want the uncomfortable version of responsibility. The kind where doing the right thing costs you something. There's a quote from MLK that really connects to the heart of the story that I thought about while writing. The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. That idea is a major part of what I want this story to wrestle with, because sometimes injustice is obvious, sometimes it's loud, sometimes it looks like violence, corruption, cruelty, or somebody abusing power right in front of everyone. But other times, injustice survives because people stay quiet, because they're afraid, because they convince themselves that it's not their problem, because speaking up would cost them comfort, safety, status, family, or even the future that they thought they were supposed to have. That's the version of responsibility I want Horus to face. Power is not just something that makes him special. Power puts pressure on him. It forces him to look at himself and ask, Am I going to protect myself from the world, or am I going to step into the world and answer what's wrong with it? Because in this story, doing nothing is not neutral. Silence has weight, and avoidance has consequences. And if someone has the ability to act but chooses not to because it's easier to look away, then that choice says something about who they are. That's the emotional foundation for the Falcon and the Serpent. Not revenge, not destiny, not good versus evil, but responsibility. The moment where a person realizes that if they see injustice and refuse to move, they are no longer outside of the problem. They have become a part of it.
One long, angry line later.
Accountability. That's why I'm making these videos. Each video documents a different part of the process: designing the characters, building the power system, figuring out how the world works, solving story problems, changing things that don't work, and hopefully getting feedback from people watching along the way. If you have any advice, questions, or even just thoughts about the project, please drop a comment. You know I genuinely want to hear it. The goal is very simple. Every video should move the project forward. By the end of the series, I don't just want a playlist, I want a finished chapter. Primordial, the Falcons, and the Serpent is still an early process, but that's the point. I want to document the messy part. That's the exciting part, the part where ideas are rough, but slowly turning into something real. If you're into manga, comics, webtoons, mythology, character design, world building, or just watching an idea grow from scratch, this series is going to follow that whole process. So what does that mean? Next time, I'll be breaking down the power system behind this world, really refining it. I want to figure out what makes it feel consistent, dangerous, emotional, visually interesting, because if this world is going to work, the powers can't just look cool. They need to have rules and consequences like every good magic system does. And they need to reveal something about the characters using them. So make sure to like, subscribe, and follow as I build Primordials, the Falcon and the Serpent from the ground up. And I'll see y'all next time. Peace.